Jack Fletcher had what most humans would call catastrophically bad luck. In fact, if bad luck were a competitive sport, Jack would have taken home the gold, silver and bronze medals, then somehow managed to lose them all in a freak anti-gravity accident. That's how he ended up stranded on Outpost 42B, an insignificant dustball orbiting an unremarkable star in what galactic cartographers labeled the absolute middle of nowhere. The outpost was originally established as a terraforming station, but budget cuts and bureaucratic indifference had reduced it to a glorified junkyard with life support. Day 167 of exile, Jack dictated to his malfunctioning recording device as he trudged across the rusty landscape. Still no response from Earth Command, beginning to suspect they've forgotten I exist. Alternatively, they remember exactly who I am and are deliberately ignoring me. The recording device made a noise like a drowning cat and shut off. Perfect. Just perfect, Jack muttered, stuffing it back into his pocket. Add new recorder to the list of things I'm never getting. He adjusted his breathing mask and continued his daily scavenging route. The company, which Jack now referred to exclusively as those greedy corporate bastards, had abandoned the outpost with surprising haste after the terraforming project failed. In their rush, they'd left behind a treasure trove of equipment, most of it broken or obsolete, but still valuable to a man whose survival depended on cobbling together functioning technology from spare parts. Jack was digging through a particularly promising pile of discarded machinery when he heard it, a sound like someone gargling battery acid while simultaneously playing a broken accordion. What the hell? He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the shock prod he carried for protection against the occasional aggressive native wildlife. The noise came again, louder this time from behind a cluster of rust-red boulders. Jack hesitated. The smart move would be to ignore it and continue scavenging. But curiosity had always been Jack's defining trait, that and his remarkable ability to make catastrophically bad decisions. This is how people die in horror movies, he informed no one in particular as he cautiously approached the boulders. When he peered around the largest rock, he nearly dropped his shock prod in surprise. Lying on the ground, partially covered in dust, was the strangest creature Jack had ever seen, and he'd seen some weird stuff during his time on 42B. The beast was roughly the size of a rhinoceros, with iridescent purple scales covering most of its body. It had 6 limbs, 4 sturdy legs and 2 smaller appendages that looked suspiciously like arms, complete with 3-fingered hands. Its head featured 3 compound eyes arranged in a triangle and a mouth full of teeth that spiraled inward like a biological garbage disposal. Most notably, one of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and a viscous blue fluid, blood, Jack presumed, was pooling beneath it. The creature made that horrible gargling accordion sound again, which Jack now recognized as a cry of pain. Oh no, no no no, Jack backed away. I am not getting involved in this. I have enough problems without adopting an alien monster. The creature's 3 eyes swiveled to focus on him, and it made a softer sound, almost like a whimper. One of its hand-like appendages reached toward him in what Jack's imagination insisted was a pleading gesture. Don't look at me like that, Jack said, pointing an accusatory finger at the beast. I'm not qualified to treat human injuries, let alone whatever you are. The creature blinked its 3 eyes in sequence, then all at once. Jack sighed deeply, already knowing he would regret what he was about to do. Fine. But if you eat me, I'm going to be very disappointed in both of us. He approached slowly, hands raised in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-threatening intent. Okay big guy, let's get you patched up, and then you can go back to whatever it is you normally do, probably terrorizing smaller lifeforms and starring in local children's nightmares. As Jack knelt beside the injured creature, he had no idea that this encounter would change not only his life, but potentially the fate of several galactic civilizations. He was, after all, catastrophically unlucky that way. Getting the injured beast back to his habitat module proved to be what Jack would later describe as an exercise in creative profanity and questionable physics. He'd cobbled together a makeshift Travis from scrap metal and old cargo straps, which groaned in protest with each step. You know, Jack grunted as he pulled the enormous creature across the dusty terrain, I'm starting to think you might be violating several laws of conservation of mass. There's no way you should be this heavy. The creature responded with a gurgling trill that somehow managed to sound both appreciative and mocking. Oh sure, laugh it up, Jack muttered. You're not the one who'll need spinal reconstruction after this. By the time they reached the habitat module, a domed structure that resembled a giant metallic mushroom with engineering issues, Jack's muscles were screaming, and his lungs felt like they'd been scrubbed with steel wool. He punched in the entry code, and the airlock hissed open. Welcome to Chateau Fletcher, he announced, dragging the beast inside. Please ignore the mess. I wasn't expecting company for the rest of my natural life. The interior of the habitat was a chaotic blend of salvaged technology, improvised furniture, and what could generously be called creative storage solutions. Jack cleared a space in the main living area by unceremoniously shoving several crates of spare parts against the wall. All right, he said, wiping sweat from his brow, let's assess the damage. The creature's injured leg was definitely broken, with blue blood still seeping from a nasty wound. Two of its eyes watched Jack while the third seemed to scan the habitat with apparent curiosity. I need to clean that wound, Jack explained, rummaging through his meager medical supplies. This might sting a bit, or it might dissolve your flesh entirely. Xenobiology wasn't exactly my specialty. He approached with a bottle of antiseptic, then hesitated. You're not going to bite my head off if this hurts, right? Blink once for no head biting, and twice for your skull would make a lovely snack bowl. The creature blinked once, very deliberately. Well, that's reassuring, Jack said, not feeling remotely reassured. Here goes nothing. As he dabbed the antiseptic on the wound, the beast let out a sound like a steam kettle mating with a foghorn. All three eyes bulged, and its uninjured limbs thrashed wildly. I said it might sting, Jack shouted, barely avoiding being crushed by a flailing appendage. Stop being such a baby. You're built like a tank crossed with a nightmare. Remarkably, the creature settled down, though it continued to make low grumbling noises that Jack interpreted as alien obscenities. Now for the tricky part, he said, eyeing the broken leg. I need to set this before I can splint it. This is definitely going to hurt. Jack positioned himself carefully, grabbed the leg, and counted down. 3, 2, he yanked suddenly, realigning the bone with a sickening crunch. The beast's reaction was immediate, and ear-splitting. Its roar shook dust from the habitat's ceiling, and Jack was certain the windows would have shattered if they weren't made of reinforced polymers. There, he shouted over the creature's wailing. Worst part's over, now hold still while I make a splint. Using salvaged metal rods and strips of fabric torn from his spare jumpsuit, Jack constructed a surprisingly effective splint for the massive limb. Throughout the process, the beast watched him with what he could have sworn was grudging respect. I'm going to call you Fluffy, Jack decided as he finished securing the splint. Because clearly, the universe appreciates irony. Fluffy made a sound that resembled a garbage disposal attempting to process a spork. I'll take that as approval, Jack said, patting the creature's side. Now, what do you eat? Please don't say humans or souls of the innocent. Over the next several days, Jack discovered that Fluffy had surprisingly diverse tastes. The beast happily consumed the station's protein paste, which Jack had always found barely edible, native vegetation that Jack brought back from his scavenging trips, and on one memorable occasion, an entire shelf of metal components that Jack had been saving for repairs. Those were irreplaceable, Jack had shouted, while Fluffy looked supremely unconcerned, and belched out a small cloud of sparks. Despite these dietary disagreements, Jack found himself growing fond of the bizarre creature. Fluffy seemed to be intelligent, responding to Jack's constant chatter with various sounds that conveyed a surprising range of emotions. The beast was also healing remarkably quickly. The blue blood had stopped flowing within hours, and after just a few days, Fluffy was putting weight on the injured leg. You're going to be back to terrorizing the countryside in no time, Jack told Fluffy, while changing the splint. Whatever you are, you've got an impressive immune system. Fluffy nudged Jack's hand with its head in what had become a familiar gesture of affection. Jack scratched between the creature's eyes, eliciting a rumbling sound not unlike purring, if purring involved subwoofers and minor seismic activity. You know, Jack said, thoughtfully, I've been here for months and never seen anything like you. Where did you come from, big guy? As if in answer, Fluffy's head suddenly jerked up, all three eyes widening. The creature made a low, warning growl. What is it? Jack asked, instantly alert. What's wrong? Then he heard it too, the distant but unmistakable sound of engines. Powerful engines, far more sophisticated than anything that should have been on this forgotten outpost. Someone's coming, Jack whispered, a mixture of hope and dread washing over him. But who? Fluffy's growl deepened and Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Whoever was arriving, Fluffy clearly didn't consider them friendly. I'm starting to think you might be more than just a random alien beast, Jack said, peering out the viewport at the approaching lights in the sky. And I have a feeling I'm about to find out exactly how much trouble I've gotten myself into. The ship that descended from the dusty sky, was not the utilitarian transport Jack had been expecting from Earth Command. This vessel screamed excessive luxury, with the subtlety of a supernova. Its sleek obsidian hull was inlaid with what appeared to be actual gold trimming, and it moved with the kind of precision engineering that indicated obscene amounts of money had been spent on its design. That, Jack informed Fluffy, is definitely not a rescue mission for stranded terraforming engineers. Fluffy made a sound like metal being torn apart underwater. I'm getting that impression too, Jack agreed, ducking away from the viewport. Let's just keep quiet, and maybe they'll go away. Jack's hopes were immediately dashed as the ship settled gracefully onto the barren ground directly in front of his habitat module. A landing ramp extended from its underside with theatrical slowness, accompanied by theatrical smoke effects that Jack was certain served no practical purpose whatsoever.
"Who needs that much fog for a ship exit?" he hissed. "Are they afraid we won't realize how important they are without special effects?" Fluffy had pressed itself against the far wall of the habitat, all three eyes fixed on the viewport, with an expression Jack could only describe as extremely concerned for someone with compound eyes. A figure appeared at the top of the ramp, backlit dramatically by the ship's interior lights. Even from a distance, Jack could tell this was someone of importance. The figure was tall and slender, draped in flowing garments that shimmered with an iridescent quality suspiciously similar to Fluffy's scales. "Oh no," Jack whispered. "Please tell me you don't belong to space royalty." Fluffy made a small guilty noise. "Fantastic. Just fantastic." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I've kidnapped some alien princess's pet. This is exactly the kind of catastrophically bad luck I've come to expect from my life." As the figure descended the ramp, more shapes emerged behind it, large armored shapes that moved with military precision. Guards, clearly, and heavily armed ones at that. The leader reached the bottom of the ramp and paused, surveying the desolate landscape with visible disdain. Even without being able to see the details of their face, Jack could feel the contempt radiating off them in waves. "Attention, inhabitants of this place." The voice boomed through what had to be an extremely powerful amplification system. "I am Baroness Vexthuria of the 7th Imperial Fleet, Duchess of the Crimson Nebula and rightful owner of the Royal Ravager." The voice paused dramatically before continuing. "My precious little Ravager has gone missing, and our tracking systems indicate it is somewhere in this vicinity. Surrender it immediately, and your lives shall be spared. Resist, and you shall face the full wrath of the baronial forces." "Precious little Ravager," Jack repeated incredulously, turning to Fluffy. "Is that you? That's what you're called? A Ravager?" Fluffy made a noise that sounded suspiciously like embarrassment. "Wait, lives shall be spared." Jack's brain finally caught up with the rest of the announcement. That's not a great starting point for negotiations. Outside, the Baroness was continuing her proclamation. "Be advised that the Royal Ravager is a level 9 predatory organism capable of consuming creatures twice its size. Approach with extreme caution. It is also my beloved pet, and if I find a single scale damaged, I shall personally oversee the execution of whoever is responsible." Jack glanced at the splinted leg, and the nearly healed wound on Fluffy's side. "Well, we're dead," he concluded cheerfully. "It's been nice knowing you, Fluffy. Or should I call you Royal Ravager for the few remaining minutes of my existence?" Fluffy nudged Jack's arm gently and made a reassuring rumble. "Your confidence is touching but misplaced," Jack replied, patting the creature's head absently while trying to think of a way out of this situation that didn't end with his molecules being painfully rearranged. Outside, the Baroness had finished her speech, and was now directing her guards to spread out and search the area. Jack could see at least a dozen heavily armed soldiers fanning out from the ship, scanning equipment in hand. "They're going to find us," Jack muttered. "This habitat isn't exactly hidden, and I'm guessing they can track you." Fluffy made a resigned noise that seemed to confirm Jack's suspicion. "There's only one thing to do," Jack decided, straightening up with sudden resolve. "We're going to have to run for it." Fluffy tilted its head questioningly. I know. Your leg isn't fully healed. You're the size of a small transport vehicle, and we're on an empty planet with nowhere to hide," Jack acknowledged. "But I've spent months mapping this outpost and the surrounding terrain. There are underground maintenance tunnels from the original terraforming project. If we can reach them, we might be able to evade detection long enough to— Well, I haven't figured that part out yet." Jack began hurriedly gathering supplies: water, emergency rations, medical kit, and his precious shock prod. "It's not much of a plan," he admitted, stuffing everything into a battered backpack, "but it's marginally better than staying here and being executed by an angry space aristocrat." Through the viewport, Jack could see the guards methodically approaching,
scanning devices beeping with increasing frequency as they neared the habitat module. "They're getting close," Jack whispered. "We need to go now. Can you move?" Fluffy rose to its feet with surprising steadiness, though Jack noticed it was still favoring the injured leg. "Good enough," Jack decided. "We'll use the maintenance exit at the back. If we're lucky, they haven't surrounded us completely yet." As Jack moved toward the rear of the habitat, a thunderous pounding suddenly rattled the main airlock. "Inhabitant of this structure," boomed the Baroness's amplified voice. "Our scans indicate the Royal Ravager is within your dwelling. Open this door immediately or face disintegration." Jack looked at Fluffy. Fluffy looked at Jack. "Run?" Jack suggested. Fluffy made a sound of enthusiastic agreement. "Run it is," Jack confirmed, hitting the emergency release for the rear exit. "Let's see if we can outrun catastrophically bad luck." As the back panel slid open, revealing the dusty landscape beyond, Jack couldn't help but wonder how his life had come to this, fleeing across an alien planet with an injured predatory beast, pursued by an overdramatic space baroness and her heavily armed entourage. Just another day in the catastrophically unlucky life of Jack Fletcher. In retrospect, Jack wheezed as he half-guided, half-dragged Fluffy across the dusty terrain. "This may not have been my most brilliant plan." Fluffy made a noise that managed to convey both agreement and accusation. "Oh, don't give me that look," Jack protested. "I don't see you coming up with any better ideas. Your contribution so far has been exist conspicuously and be alarmingly heavy." Behind them, the shouts of the Baroness's guards grew louder, accompanied by the distinctive whine of energy weapons being charged. Jack had hoped they'd have at least a few minutes head start, but apparently the Baroness's forces were more efficient than their theatrical entrance had suggested. "The maintenance tunnel entrance should be just beyond that ridge." Jack pointed toward a low outcropping of reddish rocks about 50 meters ahead. "If we can make it there, we might have a chance." Fluffy, despite its injury, was now moving with surprising speed, its 6 limbs working in a hypnotic, undulating pattern. The creature seemed to be running on pure adrenaline, or whatever the alien equivalent was. Blue adrenaline, alien adrenaline. Jack's brain was spiraling into nonsense, a sure sign of his own panic. "Halt!" The command cracked through the air like a whip. "Halt, or we will open fire." "They're going to shoot at their precious pet?" Jack gasped incredulously as they continued running. Fluffy made a noise that Jack somehow understood to mean, "They'll aim for you, not me." "Wonderful, just wonderful," Jack muttered. "Good to know where I stand in the grand scheme of HFY." A blast of energy struck the ground just meters to their left, sending up a spray of superheated dust and rock. Jack stumbled, but managed to keep moving. "Near miss intimidation shot," Jack analyzed, his survival instincts kicking in. "They don't actually want to hit us yet, just scare us into stopping." Another blast, this one even closer. "Their aim is improving," Jack yelped. "Run faster." They reached the ridge and scrambled over it, momentarily hidden from their pursuers. Jack frantically scanned the ground, looking for the telltale signs of the maintenance tunnel entrance. There, he spotted a small metallic hatch, partially buried under years of accumulated dust. He dropped to his knees and began clearing it away. "Help me with this." Fluffy used its smaller front appendages to assist, surprisingly dexterous for a creature of its size. Together they uncovered the hatch, revealing a rusted wheel mechanism. "Please don't be jammed. Please don't be jammed," Jack chanted as he gripped the wheel and pulled with all his strength. For a moment nothing happened, then with a screech of protesting metal, the wheel turned. The hatch popped open, revealing a dark shaft with a ladder leading down into the gloom. "You first," Jack urged Fluffy. "Can you climb down?" Fluffy gave him a look that somehow conveyed profound skepticism despite its alien features. "Right," Jack realized. 6 limbs built like a tank, not exactly designed for ladders. New plan. He peered down the shaft. It was about 4 meters to the bottom, not a deadly drop, but not pleasant either. "I'll go first and catch you," Jack decided, already lowering himself onto the ladder. Fluffy made a noise that sounded suspiciously like laughter. "I know you weigh a ton," Jack acknowledged. It was a figure of speech. "Just try to land on your good legs." He descended quickly, reaching the bottom of the shaft in seconds. The tunnel stretched out in both directions, dimly lit by emergency lighting that had somehow survived years of neglect. "Okay, come on down," Jack called up. Carefully, Fluffy stuck its head through the hatch, looking down at Jack with all 3 eyes. It made a doubtful noise,
We don't have time for second thoughts, Jack hissed, hearing the guards approaching the ridge. It's this or become a decorative rug in the Baroness's space palace. With what Jack could only describe as a resigned sigh, Fluffy squeezed its massive body through the hatch and dropped into the shaft. The creature landed with surprising grace, though it still made the ground shake on impact. Jack quickly scrambled up the ladder again, pulled the hatch closed, and spun the wheel to seal it. That should buy us some time. He climbed back down to find Fluffy examining the tunnel with evident curiosity. This way, Jack pointed to the left. These tunnels run under most of the original terraforming grid. If we keep moving, we might be able to lose them.
They set off down the tunnel, Jack leading the way with a small emergency light he'd pulled from his pack. The passage was larger than he remembered, designed to accommodate maintenance equipment, which was fortunate given Fluffy's size. So Jack said conversationally as they hurried along, "A royal ravager, huh? That explains the teeth, and the claws, and the general aura of could eat me without breaking a sweat. Though I don't think you actually sweat, do you?" Fluffy made a non-committal noise. "And the Baroness called you her precious little ravager. Does that mean you're a baby? Are you going to get bigger? Because that's a terrifying thought." The creature snorted, a sound that somehow conveyed indignation. Sorry, Jack backpedaled. "Adolescent? Young adult? Whatever you are, you're clearly important to her royal overdramaticness." They continued through the tunnels, taking turns seemingly at random but actually following a mental map Jack had constructed during his months of exploration. The emergency lights flickered occasionally, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "I think we're good for now," Jack said after about 20 minutes of walking. "We should take a break to check your leg." Fluffy settled onto the tunnel floor, while Jack examined the splint. "Looking good. No additional damage from our dramatic escape. You're healing remarkably fast." The creature made a pleased rumbling sound. "Don't get too comfortable," Jack warned. "They'll figure out where we went eventually. These tunnels are our advantage, but they're not exactly a perfect hiding place." As if on cue, a distant metallic clang echoed through the passage. "And there it is," Jack sighed. "They've found the hatch. Time to move again." They continued their journey through the labyrinthine tunnels, the sounds of pursuit growing intermittently louder and then fading again as they navigated the underground network. Jack was beginning to think they might actually escape when they rounded a corner and came face to face with a dead end. No, Jack muttered, running his hands along the wall. "This shouldn't be here. The tunnel should continue." He explored the barrier more carefully and realized it was actually a collapsed section. The ceiling had caved in at some point, completely blocking the passage. "We need to go back," Jack said, turning around, only to freeze at the sound of approaching footsteps and voices. "The scanner shows the Ravager's biosignature getting stronger," a voice echoed down the tunnel. "They must be close." Jack glanced frantically around the tunnel. There were no side passages, no convenient maintenance doors, nowhere to hide. "We're trapped," he whispered to Fluffy. "Unless you have some secret Ravager ability you haven't told me about. Invisibility? Teleportation? Really good at playing hide-and-seek." Fluffy's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, and then the creature did something unexpected. It moved to stand protectively in front of Jack, its massive body effectively shielding him from the approaching guards. "That's touching," Jack said, genuinely moved. "But I don't think it's going to." The lights from multiple high-powered lamps suddenly flooded the tunnel, momentarily blinding Jack. When his vision cleared, he found himself staring at a line of heavily armed guards, their weapons trained directly on him. And in the center of the line stood a figure that could only be the Baroness herself. Vexthoria was tall and imposingly elegant, with skin the same iridescent purple as Fluffy's scales. Her elaborate headdress appeared to be made from precious metals and glowing crystals, and her robes flowed around her as if they were semi-sentient. Her expression combined fury, relief and aristocratic disdain in equal measures. "So," she said, her voice surprisingly soft after the amplified declarations earlier, "you are the one who has stolen my precious Ravager." Fluffy made a defensive growling sound, still positioned protectively in front of Jack. "Technically," Jack offered with a weak smile, "I think the term you're looking for is rescued, not stolen. There's a fairly significant legal distinction there." The Baroness's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Silence, human. You will accompany us to my ship, where we will discuss the appropriate punishment for your transgression." "Looking forward to it," Jack replied, raising his hands in surrender. Always wanted to see the inside of a space palace. As the guards moved forward to apprehend him, Jack wondered if his catastrophically bad luck had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. The interior of the Baroness's ship made Jack's habitat module look like the cardboard box it had probably been shipped in.
Every surface gleamed with polished metals and exotic materials that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of view. The air was perfumed with something that reminded Jack of cinnamon, if cinnamon had been capable of making you feel socially inferior. "Nice place," Jack commented, as the guards marched him through a corridor wide enough to drive a small vehicle through. "Very shiny. Do you have someone just constantly buffing everything, or is it self-polishing?" "Silence," snapped one of the guards, jabbing Jack with the butt of his weapon. "Just making conversation," Jack muttered. No need to get pointy about it. They entered what was clearly the ship's main audience chamber, a vast cathedral-like space dominated by an ornate throne that appeared to be carved from a single piece of crystalline material. The Baroness swept ahead of the procession and settled onto the throne with practiced grace, her robes arranging themselves around her, in what Jack suspected was a carefully choreographed display of power and wealth. Fluffy was being led alongside Jack, though with considerably more deference. The creature seemed conflicted, occasionally making low rumbling sounds that might have been protests at Jack's treatment, but also clearly responding to the familiar environment of the ship. "Bring the human before me," the Baroness commanded, her voice echoing throughout the chamber. The guards shoved Jack forward, until he stood directly before the throne, Fluffy positioned slightly behind him. So the Baroness began, studying Jack with undisguised contempt. "You are the primitive creature who dared to abduct my royal ravager. Again, I think rescue is the more accurate." Silence. The Baroness's voice cracked like a whip, making Jack flinch. "Do you have any idea what you have done? The royal ravager is not merely a pet. It is a symbol of my authority, a genetically engineered guardian bred from the most fearsome predators in 3 solar systems. Its disappearance has caused diplomatic incidents across 7 planets, and called into question my very fitness to rule." "That seems like an overreaction," Jack offered, immediately regretting his words as the Baroness's face contorted with rage. "Overreaction," she hissed. "The House of Vexthoria has maintained peace in this sector for 17 generations through displays of unquestionable strength and authority. The Royal Ravager is the embodiment of that strength. Without it, rival houses have already begun testing boundaries, challenging trade agreements, questioning territorial claims." Jack blinked, trying to process this information. "So, Fluffy is basically a political statement with teeth." "Fluffy?" The Baroness's eyes widened in disbelief. "You named the Royal Ravager, Fluffy." "It seemed ironically appropriate at the time," Jack explained, growing increasingly aware that his mouth was likely to get him executed even faster than his actions. "Look, I found it, her, injured and alone. I treated the wound, splinted the broken leg, and provided food and shelter. Where exactly in that sequence of events did I commit a capital offense?" The Baroness rose from her throne, her robes billowing dramatically around her, as she descended the steps toward Jack. Despite himself, he had to admit she was intimidating, tall, regal, and radiating the kind of absolute authority that came from generations of never being told, "No, you interfered with affairs beyond your comprehension, human," she said, circling him slowly. "The Royal Ravager was on a ritual hunt, a sacred tradition that marks its transition to maturity. By rescuing it, as you so quaintly phrase it, you interrupted a ceremony, thousands of years old and caused incalculable damage to the prestige of my house." "Oh," Jack said in a small voice. "That was not on the informational brochure about this planet." The Baroness completed her circle, and stood directly before him, looking down at Jack with an expression he couldn't quite read. "However," she continued, her tone shifting slightly, "my physicians inform me that the Royal Ravager sustained injuries that would typically have been fatal. Its leg was not merely broken but shattered, and it was suffering from a rare parasitic infection that would have killed it within days if untreated." Jack glanced back at Fluffy, the Royal Ravager, with surprise. "I didn't know about any infection. I just cleaned the wound and set the bone." "The antiseptic compound you used," the Baroness said. "What was it?" Jack shrugged. "Standard terraforming first aid kit stuff. Mostly alcohol-based with some synthetic antibiotics thrown in. Nothing special, on the contrary," the Baroness replied. "That nothing special compound happens to be one of the few substances lethal to the Crixian parasite, an organism native to this planet, that is particularly fond of Ravager blood. By your bumbling intervention, you inadvertently administered the precise treatment needed." Fluffy, Jack still couldn't think of the creature by any other name, made a soft trilling sound, and moved forward, nudging the Baroness's hand with its head in the same affectionate gesture it had often used with Jack. Furthermore, the Baroness continued, absently stroking the creature's head, the royal ravager appears to have formed an attachment to you. It has been protecting you from my guards, which is unprecedented. Jack looked at Fluffy with newfound appreciation. We've been through a lot together in a short time. Trauma bonding, I guess. Perhaps, the Baroness said thoughtfully. Then with a sudden shift in demeanor, she straightened and addressed Jack formally. Human Jack Fletcher, by the ancient laws of the House of Vexthoria, I have the authority to sentence you to immediate execution for your interference with royal affairs. Jack swallowed hard. If it helps, I'm really sorry about the whole naming it Fluffy thing. The Baroness ignored his comment. However, those same laws also specify that one who saves the life of a royal guardian is entitled to consideration. Consideration sounds promising, Jack said, cautiously. I'm very much in favor of consideration, as opposed to, say, execution.
Indeed. The Baroness's lips curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Furthermore, the royal ravager's behavior suggests it would find your demise distressing. Since its well-being is paramount to my house, I am inclined to show mercy. Fluffy made an enthusiastic noise, all three eyes blinking rapidly. I'm sensing a butt coming, Jack ventured. But the Baroness confirmed, you cannot be permitted to return to your previous existence. You know too much about the royal ravager, its capabilities, and now about the political situation in this sector. Such knowledge in the hands of an unaffiliated human could be problematic. I'm pretty sure no one would believe me even if I tried to tell them, Jack pointed out. My credibility back on Earth isn't exactly stellar, hence the solo assignment to a failed terraforming outpost. The Baroness waved this away as irrelevant. I have decided your fate, human, since you have demonstrated some rudimentary ability to care for the royal ravager, and since it seems to have formed an attachment to you, you shall be appointed as its official keeper. Jack blinked in surprise. Its keeper? Like a zookeeper? A royal guardian requires attendance, the Baroness explained with exaggerated patience, as if speaking to a child. Individuals responsible for its daily care, exercise, and training. You will join my household staff in this capacity, answerable directly to me. So I'm being hired. Jack tried to process this unexpected turn. As Fluffy's, I mean the royal ravager's babysitter, in the crudest possible interpretation, yes, the Baroness acknowledged with obvious distaste at his terminology. You will be provided with appropriate quarters, training in court etiquette, and a stipend commensurate with your position. In return, you will dedicate yourself to the care and well-being of the royal ravager. Fluffy made a sound that Jack could only interpret as smug satisfaction. I get the distinct impression I've been played, Jack said, eyeing the creature suspiciously. Was your leg even really broken? The royal ravager managed to look both offended and guilty simultaneously. Do you accept this arrangement, human? The Baroness demanded, bringing Jack's attention back to the more pressing matter. The alternative is, of course, immediate execution. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? Jack replied with a weak smile. I accept your generous offer, your Baronessness. You will address me as your illustriousness, she corrected sharply. Of course, your illustriousness, Jack amended quickly. Absolutely, no problem at all. The Baroness nodded, apparently satisfied. The royal ravager will complete its ritual hunt, with you as an observer, rather than an interfering rescuer, and then you will both return to the imperial palace, to begin your new duties. As the Baroness turned to leave, Jack found his voice again. Just one question, if I may, your illustriousness. She paused, looking back over her shoulder with a raised eyebrow. What exactly does a fully mature royal ravager hunt during this ritual? Just out of curiosity. The Baroness's lips curved into a smile that made Jack's blood run cold. Why humans? Of course, the marginally intelligent ones. They provide the most entertaining challenge. As she swept from the chamber in a billow of shimmering robes, Jack turned to Fluffy with a look of profound betrayal. You were hunting me? He demanded in a whisper. All this time, Fluffy made a noise that somehow conveyed both apology and mischievous amusement. Unbelievable, Jack muttered. Absolutely unbelievable. Next time I find an injured alien predator, I'm just going to walk the other way. Fluffy nudged his hand affectionately, and despite everything, Jack found himself scratching between the creature's three eyes, earning that familiar rumbling purr. Yay, he sighed. I guess there are worse fates than becoming a royal pet sitter. At least the accommodations will be an upgrade. As the guards led them from the audience chamber, Jack couldn't help but wonder if perhaps his catastrophically bad luck had finally taken a turn for the better. even if it had done so in the most bizarre way possible. 3 months into his new position as official keeper of the Royal Ravager, Jack Fletcher found himself standing on the balcony of his private quarters in the Imperial Palace, staring out at the 3 moons that hung like jewels in the violet sky of Vextheria Prime. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up here," he remarked to Fluffy, who was sprawled luxuriously across a custom-made lounging platform nearby, "I would have recommended immediate psychiatric evaluation." Fluffy made a noise that Jack had come to recognize as its version of laughter. "I'm serious," Jack continued, leaning against the ornately carved railing. "From stranded terraforming engineer to royal beastkeeper. It's like failing upward on a cosmic scale." His quarters were ridiculously opulent, larger than the entire habitat module he'd called home for months, decorated with materials worth more than he would have earned in several lifetimes back on Earth. He had a staff of 4 assistants, whose sole purpose seemed to be making sure he didn't embarrass himself, or more importantly, the Baroness too badly during official functions. "Speaking of which," Jack said, checking the time on his newly acquired chronometer, which also predicted weather, translated 347 languages, and made surprisingly good coffee, "we're due at the diplomatic reception in 30 minutes. Think you can manage to look appropriately terrifying? You've been getting a bit lazy with your snarling lately." Fluffy yawned dramatically, displaying its impressive spiral of teeth, and then flopped back onto its side with deliberate nonchalance. "Very funny," Jack rolled his eyes. "Remember what happened at the Galactic Trade Summit? The ambassador from Rigel 7 thought you were an oversized throw pillow, until you decided to wake up and roar in his face." The poor guy molted on the spot. Jack had quickly discovered that his role as Royal Ravager Keeper was less about actual caretaking, and more about political theater. Fluffy, whose official title was too long for Jack to remember, much less pronounce, was indeed a living symbol of the Baroness's authority, trotted out at important diplomatic functions, to remind everyone of House Vextheria's power. Jack's job was essentially to make sure Fluffy performed on cue, and didn't eat anyone who wasn't on the pre-approved potentially edible list. It was, all things considered, a surprisingly cushy gig. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Nix, Jack's primary assistant, a tall, slender being with metallic blue skin and a perpetually worried expression. "Royal Keeper Fletcher," Nix announced formally. "Her illustriousness requests your immediate presence in the central strategic chamber." "It is a matter of utmost urgency." "Utmost urgency," Jack repeated, straightening up. "Did she say what it's about?" "Her illustriousness does not explain her commands to intermediaries."